author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
President Ronald Reagan once said, quote, "Christmas can be celebrated in the schoolroom with pine trees, tinsel, and reindeers. But there must be no mention of the man whose birthday is being celebrated. One wonders how a teacher would answer if a student asked why it was called Christmas," end quote. And that appears to be the situation we've arrived at. Television commercials display the trappings of Christmas, endless new movies about Santa Claus, each expressing their own unique message about what the Christmas season represents, and yet hidden among the vagaries, amid the calls for consumerist action, is the purpose of Christmas that must rarely, if ever, be named. When TV executives extol us to love one another at this special time of year, it's hardly ever specified why. Why on Christmas Day of all days? Of course, there's an argument that the spirit of love and giving should be with us at all times. Charles Dickens' character from A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge, said as much when, after his long night of spiritual visitations, he declared that he would honor Christmas in his heart and try to keep it all the year. But that brings us back to the original question. What is honoring Christmas? As Calvin and Hobbes cartoonist Bill Watterson noted, quote, "Oh, look, yet another Christmas TV special. How touching to have the meaning of Christmas brought to us by cola, fast food, and beer. Who would have ever guessed that product consumption, popular entertainment, and spirituality would mix so harmoniously," end quote. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is the lie. It seems that we're being guided from a spiritual experience to a consumerist one, something devoid of genuine emotion and replaced with an almost restless greed for sensation, consumption, and superficiality. But it won't work, not really. No matter how hard the Fourth Estate and identitarian-obsessed politicos try to shield the essence of Christmas from the general population, without Christ, there would be no Christmas. And the spirit of Christmas, these pleas that we should love one another and be generous in our spirits and hearts, they're the very core of the message of Jesus Christ. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides, and I wish you the very merriest of Merry Christmases. On today's Christmas special edition, we'll be talking with Liberty Nation's editor-in-chief, Lisa K. Donner, to ask whether Christianity is making a comeback. We'll also be discussing the crusade against Christmas with columnist Sarah Cowgill. Later in the show, we'll be doing a deep dive with economist and author Andrew Moran on what the real cost of Christmas is this year under President Joe Biden's leadership. More dollars from your pocketbook or more turkey on your plate? And we'll be wrapping up with Talking Liberty, examining the hottest and most significant legal escapades of the year and how they impact your rights. I'd like to send a special Christmas greeting to our listeners in Pasco, Washington, on KONA on 6:10 a.m. Merry Christmas, and thank you very much for being here. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Let's get started. The food has been eaten, the gifts exchanged, and the communion of family completed for another year. But what effect did President Joe Biden have on the pocketbook this Christmas? Well, despite numerous social media posts from the Democratic Party explaining just how well off you are thanks to Biden's supply chain issues and rocketing inflation, regular folk aren't quite so convinced. And to help us to get to the bottom line figure, we're joined by economist and author Andrew Moran. Thanks for being here, Andrew. Merry Christmas.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so Andrew, despite the supply chain issues, Santa appears to be on form once again. Nothing can stop him. Why wasn't he impacted?
Well, actually, the 12 days of Christmas, they have been impacted. If you look at the PNC Financial Services Christmas Price Index, everything is up, except I think the seven swans is swinging and the 8 maids of milking. I think those are actually flat, but everything else.
Well, those are in the hospitality sector, of course. Now,
the partridge in a pear tree, it's up, I think, 18%, and then the 5 gold rings are up, I think, 4.8%. So yeah, so overall, the 12 days of Christmas, they're up. I think last time I saw was 28% overall.
That's not a bad figure to have. Now, Andrew, so what is the final figure here? Not of the 12 days of Christmas, just regular Americans' pocketbooks. What cost more? What cost less?
Yeah, so the inflation number came out, and it showed that it was the annual inflation rate was 6.8%, and then also on December 14th, the producer price index came out, and then also was nearly 10%. So overall, everything is costing more. If you just look at food alone is astronomical right now. Beef and veal up 21%, a carton of eggs up 8%, bananas are up 3.7%, coffee's up 7.5%. The only noticeable declines you'll notice will be potatoes, dishes, and sewing machines. Those are the only things that cost less in November. Everything else skyrocketed dramatically. Electricity, gasoline, men's suits, women's dresses, everything you can think of under the sun, everything you find at a department store or supermarket cost you a whole lot more in November.
Now, I figure everybody's asking this question, but how much of this can be laid at the feet of the current president?
Well, I still contend that even if Trump were president, you would still have rampant inflation. He was approving all similar deficit finance, multi-trillion dollar spending bills. The Fed was printing trillions. The economy was locked down and then was opened up. So, but overall, Biden has still contributed to the inflation. He's also pumping trillions of dollars into the economy. He's creating, this excess flow of capital. And if you look at some of the price pressures, his policies, one could argue, have contributed to this as well. So, for instance, a lot of these meatpacking facilities, they're having a huge backlog. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to clear up this jam by having workers work weekends and evenings. The problem is nobody wants to do that. So what these companies have to do is that they have to jack up wages to attract the talent. Why is nobody taking it? According to a lot of these business surveys, a lot of applicants say they'd rather just stay home and collect money from the government. But now that's dried up, so they have to return to the workforce. But still, considering that there's, I think, 11 million job openings, no one's taking the bait right now.
Okay, so inflation, it's at an almost 40-year high, as you mentioned. And yet we hear from the White House spokespeople and even Jim Cramer himself that the economy has never been better. Now, I find it hard to see that. So should I ignore my own lying eyes and listen to the talking heads?
Well, I don't take much stock into anything Jim Cramer says. I've watched this guy for years, and you watch his program. One day he's saying you got to buy this stock, and the next day he says you got to sell the stock. And then I think it was this past summer he was claiming to be a genius when it came to crypto by claiming, oh yeah, I bought it when it was this low, and then I sold it right before the sell off. So I'm this genius. But show me the receipts, as Scott Cosenza once told me. But no, you should stop believing your own eyes. This is comparable all year long. From the very beginning, everyone in Washington, White House, Fed said inflation wasn't here. Consumers were feeling it. They saw it at the gas pumps. They saw it at the grocery store. They knew what was going on. Biden said this last summer that his Build Back Better agenda is going to cost taxpayers nothing. Turns out, according to the CBO, it's going to be as much as $3 trillion. So just common sense shows you don't believe any of these people. It reminds me of that line from William F. Buckley when he says he'd rather be ruled by the first 100 people in the Yellow Book than anybody in Washington. And I could see that because all these people, they're the heads of the most powerful institutions in the world, and yet they get everything wrong all the time. I wish I could get paid to get things wrong all the time. That'd be wonderful.
It seems like the dream job, doesn't it? Now, there's the famous political question that always lurches up when elections are due. And surprisingly, just 1 year into Joe Biden's time, this question is already being asked. And it's, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? In this case, are you better off now than you were 10 months ago? Now, let's hypothesize that Joe Biden's asking that question after his 1 year in office. What's the answer?
Well, I think if you're in the high income bracket, of course you're much better off. If you were in the stock market, you've made a lot of money. You've made a killing as long as you didn't sell during the days of bloodbath. But for the low and middle income people, no, they're worse off than they were a year ago, mainly because of the price inflation factor. Their purchasing power is completely deteriorated. All the wage gains they made over last year have been eviscerated because of the higher price inflation. Every single sector, I think it's except leisure and hospitality, all the real wage gains are negative. So nobody's better off than they were a year ago. So overall, no, you can't say that Biden can't ask the question with a straight face and expect a positive answer because it's not going to be a positive answer. Everyone, first year in office, a disaster so far.
Joe Biden, don't ask that question. Andrew Moran, thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having me.
Now, don't go anywhere. Later in the show, we're having an end-of-year roundup of all the biggest legal takes of the year and how they affect your rights as Americans. But next up, after this short break, we're going to be asking just how successful is the crusade against Christmas? And will it get better from here on out? Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Christmas has survived one more year, but each passing season begs the question of just how diminished the festival becomes. Whether it's radicals taking offense at the mere mention, replacing the words Christmas with the gifting season or other such consumerist inanity, or whether it's the angry ne'er-do-wells burning down trees that symbolize the festivities. Every year we discover a litany of crimes and scandals that all seem designed to make folks give up the whole thing as a bad deal. Well, nobody's been following this sad trajectory more closely than national columnist Sarah Cowgill, author, producer of the Conservative 5 show, and defender of all things Christmassy. Welcome back to the show, Sarah.
Oh, well, thank you. I love that intro.
I
need that more often. I need to put that on every article that I write for Liberty Nation.
Only in December. Now, Sarah, okay. I want your opinion on this. The war on Christmas, is it all just hyperbole, trotted out every year to sell newspapers or get clicks? Or is it a clear and present danger?
Oh, I don't think it's a danger as much as it is an annoyance. People don't like to have their religious traditions trashed by the media or by other people or by the dumbing down of words or songs or what's going to be on your holiday table. So I don't think it's danger. But it's been creeping up. I mean, people didn't used to complain about Christmas, and now it seems like it's a little bit more of an open season and they can get away with it. But it just angers people.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's a particular segment of the radical left. For them, Christmas is just one of the shining lights that must be doused in a culture war that former President Barack Obama says doesn't even exist. What's your take on that?
I think that it's people trying to equalize, and in equalizing, they got to take away the fun and the shiny objects and the family traditions. People who have the tree up and they have their presents under the tree, and the other people that don't celebrate that or didn't grow up that way are the first to pounce. Oh, well, they shouldn't have presents. I didn't get presents, or we didn't have a tree, or any of those things. I mean, this is a religious holiday to begin with. And it's, of course it's been, morphed over the years. This didn't happen 200 years ago. This is more of a 20th century kind of a celebration. But, on the other hand, it's in the last 10 years, we've just seen, Seinfeld came out with Festivus for the rest of us, and it's like, well, that's fine. Nobody cares. Nobody's jumping on your holidays. So just leave ours alone kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that many non-Christians celebrate Christmas to some degree. And that's, as you put it, in a more 20th century style. And this has led to companies, corporations trying to capitalize on the season, but without breaking out of their culturally woke corporate personas, as it were. So on TV ads, we see all the trappings of the family meal, the communion with others, the foods, the decoration, and yet not a mention of the word Christmas. Are they really fooling anybody? Is this some kind of attempt to make Christmas nothing but a consumer-led holiday?
Oh, it's smoke and mirrors, Mark. If they show the traditional holiday trappings, the tree, the lights, the reindeer, the candy canes, the turkey on the table, if they show that, then they don't have to say Merry Christmas. They can get away with it. And they do get away with it because people, I don't think a lot of people care because, they just are going to do their own thing. They're not paying attention. And I don't think it's registering with them that, it's all just a big bait and switch kind of game with corporate retail.
Well, there is one area that is clearly affected even by those who, those good, sensible folks who do not watch television adverts at any time of year. And that's the language. It's a competition for language. People pushing for happy holidays over Merry Christmas. And of course, that's on a much wider scale too. And it is from all political sides. For example, the term Latinx, which was so popular last year, said by politicos, including President Biden, I might add, now seems to be falling out of favor, with folks almost rejecting their heavy-handed approach at social engineering. Do you think that the variants of Merry Christmas will also fall by the wayside in the same way that Latinx now seems to be?
I have a rule of thumb on this, and this is just me, but when Thanksgiving rolls around, it's the holiday season, and the holiday seasons run from, Thanksgiving through New Year's and sometimes through Valentine's Day. And that's a big retail time of year. But if you say happy holidays, that gets you through Thanksgiving, it gets you through Hanukkah, it gets you through Kwanzaa, it gets you through Christmas and through New Year's.
Of course, nobody actually celebrates Kwanzaa, I believe. I don't think anybody celebrates
I don't think
Kwanzaa.
they do. I think they celebrate Christmas. But I think when you're right up on the holiday, when you're right up on the week of Christmas, everybody says Merry Christmas. And maybe that's just me. When I had worked for the governor of Arizona, it was the holiday season. We did not mix church and state. So we did stay away from that. It was, the holiday trees. It was the holiday party. It was those kinds of things. But in the real world, when I'm not working for government, it's Merry Christmas. It's Happy Hanukkah. If I know you're Jewish, I know when Hanukkah rolls around. And I think that, you have so many, even atheists have Christmas trees. They don't celebrate the reason behind all the trappings. They just like the shiny objects like the rest of us do. So, it's kind of fun. It's a festive time of year. I just think if happy holidays shouldn't irritate anyone any more than Merry Christmas.
Okay, final question for you. What's the one political gift you wished that Santa Claus had delivered for you this year?
A clean slate in the swamp. Let's take the chalkboard eraser and maybe start over with a decent group of Americans.
Sarah Cowgill, Merry Christmas.
Ho, ho, ho.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. And remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation Radio from 2 to 3 p.m. Sunday on KBKW 103.5 FM and on 1450 AM, the talk of Grays Harbor. Now, further down the line, we're talking liberty with Scott Cosenza. How's the Second Amendment fared in 2021? But right after this short break, however, we'll be asking whether Christianity is making a comeback with Liberty Nation's editor-in-chief, Lisa K. Donner. Now, that's a show that you don't want to miss, so hang on in there and don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
It's been a trying year with the pandemic and inflation and such, and one wonders how and in what way does this affect people of faith? To answer that question, we're joined by Liberty Nation's editor-in-chief, Lisa K. Donner. Thanks for being here, Lisa.
Happy to be here, Mark.
So specifically in the area of Christianity, Lisa, I got to ask, is Christianity making a comeback this year, specifically with the pandemic, things like this?
Well, there's good news and bad news. Worldwide, according to most sources, there's about 2.5 billion Christians that live in the world. But Christian growth is at about 1.2%, which means it's much higher than, say, the atheists, which is at 0.2%. That's like damning it with faint praise because its growth is slower than in Islam, Hinduism, and Sikhism. But you have to keep in mind, too, that the population in those areas is greater than the population where Christianity is not growing. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about these sectors of the planet where Christianity is growing. So which ones are they and which ones are not growing?
All right. So if you look at the equator, it's really easily divided. In the southern hemisphere, Christianity is growing. In the northern hemisphere, Christianity is diminishing. So the number one place on the earth right now where Christianity is really firing is in Africa. That is followed by Asia and Latin America. Europe, however, Christianity is dying. And in America, North America, it is definitely diminishing. It's on a decline.
Okay, and so that's the recent figures. Can we look at a few of the historical trends, perhaps?
Well, it's interesting because Christianity really isn't like a roller coaster where it dives up and down. It's been kind of a slow creep. So between 1900 and 2021, in comparison to the world population, Christianity has declined by 2.2%. That's over 100. That's over a century. It's only declined by 2.2, but it's not growing anyway. The folks over at Gordon Conwell seem to think it'll grow a little bit by 2025, and then by 2050 there'll be an uptick of 2.5% more Christians. But again, this is not a wave.
Okay, so specifically, how is Christianity faring in the United States?
Well, there's two ways to look at this, and one is by church affiliation, church attendance. And so Gallup did a survey this year, and they claimed that church membership dipped below 50% for the first time in 80 years in the United States. This is directly tied to the generations because they looked at church affiliation and church attendance by generation. So say the baby boomers, 58% of them go to church. Gen Xers, 50% of them go to church. Gen Zers, 36% go to church. You kind of get the idea what's going on there. And then, of course, we have the issue with the mainline denominations. The main lines are, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, they're hemorrhaging congregants. They dropped 40% in the last decade. But I don't think we can, the evangelicals can crow because they're on the decline too.
Okay, now, as a Christian, what do you make of this overall trend, and do you find it demoralizing at all?
No. I don't think any of this comes as a surprise to Christians. I mean, there's a lot of missionary work going on across the world, but it isn't by missionary work that people become Christians. It's by the Holy Spirit. So there's a scripture in the book of Matthew, and I'm paraphrasing. It says, quote, "Narrow is the gate that leads to life, and few find it." So none of us really know when the next great awakening is going to occur. But Christians read the book the Bible in toto, and so they're comforted by such scriptures as, like in Philippians, which says, quote, "At the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord." So no, I wouldn't say that this information upsets Christians because most hold a sincere hope that people around the world will come to a saving faith.
And I think that's the perfect place to leave it today, Lisa. Merry Christmas to you.
And Merry Christmas to you, Mark.
As it is indeed the season of appreciation and gratitude, I'd like to just take a short moment to offer our thanks and best wishes to our friends at the Radio America Network and to the radio stations, literally coast to coast and everywhere in between, who broadcast this show and bring it into your homes and your offices and your cars, of you, the listeners. It's a chain effort from all of us. Unfortunately, it's a chain that has yet to be interrupted by political machination or inept government overreach. It's a real pleasure for me to have this opportunity to speak to you each and every week. And I hope that with our range of wonderful guests that you get something out of it, something you can take away and hold on to throughout the week. And so I wish a very Merry Christmas to you all, every single one. You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio on the Radio America Network. And we'll be right back talking liberty with Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire. Now, how has 2021 been for your constitutional rights? Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio and to our year-end roundup of Talking Liberty. Well, it's been quite the year, both constitutionally and judicially. And as a fond or not so fond farewell, we're joined by Legal Affairs Editor and Uprising podcast host, Scott Cosenza, to take a look back at the legal world in focus. Merry Christmas to you, Scott.
Cheers, Mark. Merry Christmas to you.
So before we get started, can you give us a brief rundown of the state of play for abortion in the United States? It seems to me that there's been more legal maneuverings on this than at any time in the last decade, or even possibly since Planned Parenthood v. Casey back in '92. Now, what's your legal take on it?
Well, that is true. The main story, I think, is the success of getting those challenges advanced through the courts to a high level. Now, this has been a kind of a big year for abortion law, but really it's 2022 that's going to be probably the bigger year, because that's going to either yield a defense of Roe and Casey in some form by the Supreme Court majority, or the opposite, and a denigration of it, perhaps even an overturning of it, if we believe the hopes of conservatives and the fears of the pro-choicers.
So continuing with the Supreme Court, let's go over Maine school choice. Now, school choice obviously come into the headlines a great deal, especially with the election of Glenn Youngkin as the new governor of Virginia. And people, parents specifically, arguing against CRT in the classrooms, against the heavy-handedness of school boards. So what's the significance now of the Maine school choice case?
Well, this case is Carson V Macon, and I don't think we've spoken about it on Liberty Nation Radio. So this is one of those cases that has the potential to be pretty impactful going forward. Most of the major sort of changes in the law that we see surrounding big issues are not done with one major case on their own. They're done through a series of cases that get to the case that kind of is the straw that breaks the camel's back, if you will. And this is about government funding of private education in religious-based institutions. Maine has a kind of peculiar situation where there are a number of very rural residents who don't have access to a government public school. And so what happens is the state did a workaround where they basically pay for private school tuition for those Mainers to attend a non-government school, but they forbid that money being used at a religious school. So then you have a case where if you're a-religious or anti-religious even, perhaps, you can get the state money, but if you're pro-religious, you can't. So it's a discrimination against the religion specifically. I think it's a very fascinating case. And, the court watchers will tell you that the Supreme Court was hostile to that setup at oral argument. We were waiting for a decision on that, which will come in the new year. But I agree that they were hostile to the setup. At least, the majority of the justices, which are, of course, now Republican appointees and skew conservative.
So it's not quite the school choice, whereas anybody in the country can choose how and where their child is educated. It's more a case of religious discrimination than offering a broad swath school choice to the American public.
That's exactly right. In this case, if it were decided in favor of the plaintiffs who wish to apply that funding to religious schools, if their case was won, this would not mean that there would be public funding for religious schooling. That's why I prefaced my comments by talking about the cases as building blocks towards major precedents, and I think this case has the potential to be such a building block.
Yeah, that's definitely one to watch. Now, I have to ask, this is something that's very important to many of our listeners, I believe, and of course to yourself and to me. How has this year been for advocates of the Second Amendment?
Well, it's a mixed bag, Mark. In terms of the federal courts, I think it was been a down year. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, sitting in California, derisively called the Ninth Circus, ruled in a case called Duncan v. Bonta. And now this case, since 2006, it has been sort of back and forth batting around the federal courts in California. This all comes from Jerry Brown's 2016 Gunmageddon group of laws that were basically this suite of anti-firearms laws, including a magazine restriction, which is what the Duncan v. Bonta case concerns. Basically, the state, without grandfathering in currently legally owned products, said if you have a firearm magazine that's capable of holding more than 10 rounds, you're going to be a felon if you don't get that magazine out of state or destroy it or throw it away.
So I've got two follow-up questions on that very quickly. Firstly, how long do magazines actually last if they're well cared for?
Well, a metal magazine that's entirely made out of metal will last until the spring gives out. It's dependent on a standard firearm magazine operates by pressuring a plate to feed the ammunition through the top of the magazine, what we call the lips of the magazine. As long as that spring produces sufficient pressure in order to advance the next round up, okay, through the magazine, then it lasts forever. But basically, I mean, a very, very long time. There are plenty of magazines that are in use 50, 70 years after they've been produced without having the springs replaced, and they're fine. The other type of major manufacturer of magazines are plastic, at least plastic in part, and they will hold up until the plastic, I assume, will get brittle enough, or it will degrade over time more quickly than the metal one. But for all intents and purposes, if you had a newborn today and went out and bought a bunch of magazines, they could use them for their entire life and pass them on as well.
So that kind of brings me to my second point here. Now, with these things basically lasting a lifetime, what you're saying is that somebody would have to throw away something that's perfectly usable, perfectly adequate for purpose, or they will automatically become a felon, which can lead to prison time, right?
Certainly, yeah. And California is, it will lead to that. I mean, I would never advise anybody to tempt their fate in the California courts over something like this. They are serious about being as anti-gun as possible. We talked last week, Mark, about Governor Newsom's attempt to apply the Texas abortion law, the mechanics of that law in California against gun owners and sellers. So to say that they're motivated to strip people of their rights to keep and bear arms and their actual arms is an understatement.
And then, of course, they're stuck with the paradox because, of course, California wants to close down all the prisons. So what do they do with these potentially tens of thousands of automatic overnight felons? Do you think they'll reopen the prisons specifically for Second Amendment offenders?
I know somebody who is moving from California in the next month, and the prices of moving trucks, if you're moving from California to go, for instance, to Florida, which is what this person is doing, is drastically, geometrically less than to go the other way, because the people who have the means and availability and the foresight are getting the hell out of there, and they should, I suppose.
It should perhaps be a reverse gold rush where people hitch up their own wagons, but I'm sure in California you're not allowed to use a horse for public transport. Now,
Mark, it's actually cheaper for this person to fly out of California to pick up the truck, to drive back to California, to then drive it out of there, rather than get it in California. That's how the marketplace is sorting out right now.
And that sounds to me like a wonderful adventure of pure Americana and something I would happily help out with. Now, I have one final question for you, Scott, because we can't escape this year without talking about the vaccine mandate. Now, in living memory, this is the first time that people have really been under pressure for this kind of blanket mandate. Now, of course, in certain industries, people are expected to have vaccines for certain things. This is common practice in the military, of course, or for serving in theaters overseas. But what's the legal situation here?
Well, Mark, people are realizing that the power of especially state governments to regulate, quote unquote, public health in the form of vaccine mandates has been one way pretty much since the founding. And it is that they are allowed. I think that the big story here is a political story attached to the legal story, which is that if people want their states to be forbidden from or restricted for acting under public health mandates that restrict their liberty, they're going to have to act politically to do so. They're not going to get succor in the courts from liberals, conservatives, or any kind of person along the political spectrum. This is a clear case where that state power has been recognized really throughout our history. And so they're not going to get relief in the courts. That's what we've seen time and time and time again.
Some would suggest that this is probably quite a good thing, though, isn't it? That states have the power to override specifically federal wishes or even federal mandates, as has been the case. We've seen Joe Biden's federal mandates struck down again and again, or just ignored by state governors. So,
well,
in
let me
terms
stop
of
you right. Let
yeah.
me just please stop you right there and say that there's a vast difference between state action and federal action in this area. So there haven't been historically many, if any, federal mandates in this area. They have come from state law. And while the Biden federal mandate has been stricken down by, I lost count of how many different courts have, stricken it down, we don't have the same experience with state level mandates, restrictions, shutdowns, what have you. And that's historically where this public health mandate and recognition of it has come from in the courts. And those same courts that are striking down those federal mandates are not striking down, by and large, state mandates. So I celebrate that any mandate for people to have to put some solution in their arm that a government functionary says is going to be good is a bad idea and should be stricken down. But it's important to realize that that's not happening at the state level, even as it does happen with this federal mandate.
Well, I think that ties us very nicely back into what we talked about earlier, where people can move where they want to deal with state laws as they wish. And that's one of the real wonders of the United States of America, especially for me as a Brit who watches on and just marvels at the prospect of being able to choose which state you want to live in while still being an American. And that's something that I think as this Christmas we can all be thankful for.
The 50 laboratories of democracy within our constitutional republic, Mark.
And may it long reign. Merry Christmas to you, Scott.
Ho, ho, ho.
And that's all we have time for on this Christmas edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our special guests, Editor-in-Chief of LibertyNation.com, Lisa K. Donner, National Columnist Sarah Cowgill, Economist Andrew Moran, and of course, Talking Liberty's uncaped crusader, Scott D. Cosenza Esquire. My thanks and appreciation go out to you, the constant listener, for your continued support and engagement. You're deeply appreciated. A parting thought for you, if I may. In President Calvin Coolidge's Christmas presidential address in 1927, he said, quote, "To the American people, Christmas is not a time or a season, but a state of mind. To cherish peace and goodwill, to be plenteous in mercy, is to have the real spirit of Christmas. If we think on these things, there will be born to us a Savior, and over us will shine a star, sending its gleam of hope to the world." End quote. Now, I feel that this is an important idea to keep hold of over the season. We all enjoyed the feasts, the family, the friends, the beautiful decorations that light up our homes and delight our families and our neighbors, and of course the gifts. Who doesn't appreciate thoughtful gifts? But remember, that feeling of goodwill to all men is not something we can turn on and off like lights on a Christmas tree. It should be something that resonates from deep within to those folks all around us, keeping the spark of humanity, humility, and gratitude for the blessings we have going all year long. The greatest Christmas gift we can each individually give the world is our continued effort at keeping the spiritual essence of the season alive and well, until it comes time to start the whole season once more. Thanks for sharing this Christmas with us here on Liberty Nation Radio. We'll be back together in the coming new year for our special analysis on what 2022 holds for us in the world of politics, law, culture, and the Fourth Estate. See you soon. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.